All right, kids, dig in. I hope you like my special sauce.
I had no idea you were royalty. Thank you for your kindness to my children, human.
He thought he was helping a few hungry alien children. He had no idea he was feeding the heirs of a fallen empire. And before this story is over, a single human maintenance worker will stand between an invading armada and one of the most powerful royal bloodlines in the galaxy. Ethan Carter never expected his life to matter to anyone. The orbital elevator outside New Phoenix Colony needed constant repairs, and that was his job. Wake up before sunrise, ride the transit line to the elevator complex. Spend 10 hours replacing worn components, inspecting cargo lifts, and dealing with equipment failures, then go home to a small apartment overlooking the industrial district. It wasn't a bad life, it just wasn't an important one. At least, that's what Ethan believed. The colony itself sat on the edge of civilized space. Ships arrived every day carrying cargo, workers, refugees, and sometimes entire families looking for a second chance. Most people kept to themselves. That was why nobody paid attention to the abandoned house at the end of Ethan's street. The structure had been empty for years. Broken windows, overgrown vegetation, collapsed fencing, the kind of place everyone ignored. Until Ethan noticed movement. 3 small figures appeared behind the property every afternoon. Alien children. They always arrived at exactly the same time, and they always looked hungry. The oldest was a girl with silver skin and bright violet eyes. The middle child was a boy who never stopped watching the sky. The youngest was so small he practically disappeared behind the weeds surrounding the house. Every day they sat quietly behind the fence. Every day they disappeared before sunset. And every day they looked thinner. Ethan tried ignoring it. For almost a week, he convinced himself it wasn't his business. The galaxy was full of refugees. Someone else would help them. Someone else would notice. But nobody did. One afternoon, he stopped at a food vendor and bought extra meals. He left them near the fence. Then he walked away. The next day, the food was gone. The day after that, he left more. Gone again. For 2 weeks, the strange routine continued. Then one afternoon, the oldest girl finally approached him. "Why are you doing this?" Ethan looked up from his lunch container. "Doing what?" "Giving us food." He shrugged. "You looked hungry." The girl frowned. "No one gives something for nothing. Maybe where you're from." The girl stared at him for several long seconds. Then she quietly picked up the food container and disappeared behind the fence. Ethan smiled. He assumed that would be the end of it. Instead, it was the beginning. Over the following weeks, the children slowly trusted him. The youngest introduced himself as Kiro. The middle child was named Jalen. The oldest was Lyra. None of them would answer questions about their parents. None would explain why they lived inside an abandoned building. And whenever Ethan asked, Lyra immediately changed the subject. That should have been suspicious. But Ethan wasn't investigating a mystery. He was feeding kids. One evening, he brought homemade sandwiches. The children devoured them so quickly that Ethan felt a knot form in his stomach. This wasn't ordinary hunger. This was starvation. Something was seriously wrong. The next morning, he made enough food for an entire family and walked directly toward the abandoned house. For the first time, the children didn't stop him. They simply opened the door. What Ethan found inside changed everything. The interior looked more like a survival shelter than a home. Blankets covered broken furniture. Medical equipment sat scattered across the floor. Portable batteries powered a few dim lights. And in the far corner lay an injured alien woman. The moment Ethan saw her, he knew she wasn't ordinary. Even weak and exhausted, she carried herself with impossible authority. Scars covered her arms. Old wounds crossed her shoulders. Her breathing was shallow, but her eyes looked like those of someone used to commanding entire worlds. The children immediately rushed to her side. "Mother!" The woman slowly opened her eyes. She studied Ethan carefully. "You're the human." Ethan nodded. "You're the one feeding my children." Someone had to. For several seconds, she simply stared at him. Then, something unexpected happened. The woman looked away, as if she was struggling to hide emotion. And when she finally spoke again, her voice sounded weaker. "Thank you." What Ethan didn't know was that her face appeared on classified military databases across half the galaxy. Entire fleets were searching for her. Governments were offering rewards for information about her whereabouts, because the injured woman lying on that mattress wasn't merely a mother. She was Queen Seraphina Valeris, the last ruling monarch of the Celestial Dominion, and her enemies believed she was dead. Minapata Armpormayo Brongets. For the next several days, Ethan returned to the abandoned house after work. At first, Queen Seraphina barely spoke, and she watched, observed, measured every word and action. That wasn't surprising. If Ethan had spent years running from enemies, he probably wouldn't trust strangers either. Still, something gradually changed. The children laughed more. The house felt less tense, and Seraphina slowly began accepting help. Ethan repaired damaged power cells. He fixed water filtration equipment. He brought medicine. He reinforced the broken structure against incoming storms. The Queen never asked for any of it. He simply did it. One evening, while replacing a damaged heater unit, Ethan finally asked the question that had been bothering him for weeks. "Who are you really?" The room became silent. The children immediately looked toward their mother. Seraphina set down her cup. For a moment, Ethan thought she might refuse to answer. Instead, she sighed. "You deserve the truth." The children moved closer. Not because they were afraid, because they had heard this story before. The Queen looked toward the dark window. "My people ruled nearly 6,000 star systems." Ethan nearly dropped his tools. What? The Celestial Dominion. The name sounded vaguely familiar. Then his eyes widened. Every schoolchild knew that name. The Dominion had once been among the most powerful civilizations in known space. Then it vanished almost overnight. History books claimed political collapse, economic failure, civil war. Apparently the truth was much worse. "It was a coup," Seraphina said quietly. "The military betrayed us." The room felt colder. They murdered loyal governors, destroyed entire fleets, executed members of my family. The children lowered their eyes. Ethan suddenly realized these weren't ordinary refugee children. They were royal heirs, targets, every single one of them. Seraphina continued. "We escaped with only a handful of loyal guards. What happened to them?" "They died." The answer came instantly. No hesitation, no emotion, which somehow made it worse. Years of loss had transformed tragedy into routine. "We've been running ever since." Ethan looked at the children. The oldest couldn't be older than 10. The youngest looked 6. Children should worry about games, school, friends, not assassins and military coups. The realization made him angry, very angry. But before he could speak, warning alarms suddenly erupted throughout the house. Everyone froze. Red lights flashed across the walls. The children immediately stood. Fear appeared in their eyes. Real fear, not ordinary fear, the kind that comes from experience. The Queen moved faster than Ethan thought possible for someone injured. "How many?" she asked. Lyra checked a sensor screen. Her face went pale. 3 ships. The room became silent. Then Ethan heard something. Outside. Engines. Dropship engines. Coming closer. Much closer. "They found us," Jalen whispered. The Queen's expression hardened. Years vanished from her face. In an instant, she transformed from exhausted refugee to battlefield commander. "Ethan." "Yeah, you must leave." "What?" "Now." "No." The answer surprised everyone, including Ethan. Seraphina stared. "You don't understand." "I understand enough." The engines grew louder. The children looked terrified, and Ethan realized something important. Nobody was coming to save them. No hidden fleet, no secret army, no miracle. Just one injured mother, 3 frightened children, and a human maintenance worker. Unfortunately for the attackers, that was about to become their problem. The dropship landed behind the property. Armed soldiers poured into the street. Black armor, military-grade weapons, professional formation. These weren't bounty hunters. These were elite troops. The Queen recognized the insignia immediately. "The Regent." Ethan frowned. "The guy who took your throne?" "Yes." The soldiers advanced toward the house. 100 meters, 80, 60. The children backed away, but Ethan didn't. Instead, he walked toward the front door. "What are you doing?" Lyra asked. "Buying time. You'll die." Ethan smiled. "Maybe." Then he stepped outside. 20 soldiers immediately aimed weapons at him. The commander activated a loudspeaker. "Citizen, move aside." Ethan crossed his arms. "No, no." The commander looked confused. "You are protecting them?" "Looks that way." Several soldiers exchanged amused glances, one human standing against an elite military squad. It seemed ridiculous, until Ethan remembered something. He wasn't standing near an ordinary house. He lived beside an orbital elevator, and he knew every industrial system connected to this district, every power grid, every maintenance network, every emergency override. The commander took another step forward. Last warning. Ethan pressed a control device hidden in his pocket. Across the neighborhood, transformers exploded. Streetlights vanished. Power systems overloaded. Communication networks crashed. The entire district plunged into darkness. The soldiers froze. Then automated construction drones emerged from maintenance tunnels, hundreds of them, industrial machines designed to move cargo containers weighing thousands of tons. The commander suddenly looked much less confident. Ethan grinned. Funny thing about maintenance workers, the drones surrounded the street. We know where all the switches are. For the first time, the attackers realized this operation might not be as easy as expected, and they were right, because the human they dismissed as irrelevant was about to become the greatest obstacle they had ever encountered. The commander recovered quickly. Elite soldiers didn't panic easily, especially not when facing a civilian. But Ethan wasn't behaving like a civilian anymore. The construction drones formed a wall across the street. Massive industrial arms unfolded. Hydraulic systems hissed. Floodlights activated. The soldiers adjusted their aim. The commander narrowed his eyes. "You think machines will stop us?" Ethan shrugged. "Honestly, I'm hoping you'll decide this isn't worth the paperwork." Nobody laughed. The commander raised his weapon. "Capture him." 3 soldiers advanced. That was when the first drone moved. A machine designed to lift orbital cargo containers weighing hundreds of tons swung one mechanical arm downward. The impact shattered the pavement. The soldiers jumped back instantly. A second drone blocked the street, then a third, then 10 more. The attackers suddenly found themselves staring at enough industrial hardware to level an entire city block. Inside the house, Lyra watched through a cracked window. He should run. Serafina slowly shook her head. No. Why? The Queen's eyes remained fixed on Ethan. Because humans don't leave people behind. The young girl frowned. She had heard stories about humans. Most species considered them reckless, dangerously loyal, capable of risking everything for complete strangers. At the time, she thought those stories were exaggerated. Now she wasn't so sure. Outside, the standoff continued. The commander's patience finally ended. Fire. Energy weapons erupted simultaneously. Bright plasma bolts slammed into the drones. Metal exploded. Sparks filled the street. One drone collapsed immediately. Another lost an arm. A third caught fire. Ethan's grin disappeared. "Okay," he muttered, "that was expensive." The soldiers advanced. The drones charged. The street became chaos. Industrial machines crashed into military formations. Soldiers scattered. Concrete shattered. Vehicles overturned. The noise echoed across the entire district. For nearly 5 minutes the battle raged. And despite overwhelming firepower, the attackers made almost no progress. Because Ethan wasn't trying to win. He was trying to delay them. Every second mattered. Every minute mattered. Unknown to the soldiers, an emergency transmission had already left the colony. A message, a warning, a desperate signal aimed at the only remaining loyal forces of the Celestial Dominion. The problem? They were several hours away. The attackers only needed one breakthrough, one opening, one opportunity. Eventually they got it. A missile launcher appeared. Ethan saw it immediately. His stomach dropped. Industrial drones could stop soldiers. They couldn't stop anti-armor missiles. The launcher fired. The projectile screamed toward the house. Everything seemed to slow down. The children were inside. Serafina was inside. There wasn't enough time. Then Ethan did something incredibly stupid. He ran toward the missile. Even years later, he couldn't fully explain why. Maybe instinct, maybe adrenaline, maybe simple human stubbornness. Whatever the reason, he jumped onto a damaged cargo loader and activated its emergency propulsion system. The massive machine accelerated forward. The missile struck. The explosion lit up the entire district. Windows shattered. Vehicles flipped. A fireball consumed the street. Inside the house, Lyra screamed. Serafina closed her eyes. For one terrible moment, everyone believed Ethan was dead. Then a voice crackled through a damaged communication speaker. Okay, static. That definitely hurt. The children stared in disbelief. The smoke slowly cleared. The cargo loader was destroyed. Completely destroyed. But Ethan remained standing behind the wreckage, bruised, bleeding, barely conscious, yet somehow still alive. The commander looked horrified. "What is wrong with humans?" One soldier answered honestly. "We don't know." The attackers launched a final assault. This time they reached the house. Doors exploded inward. Walls shook. The battle moved inside. Serafina grabbed an old plasma pistol. The children hid behind reinforced barriers. For the first time in years, the queen prepared to fight personally. Not as a ruler, not as a monarch, as a mother. The first soldier entered. Serafina fired. The second followed. She fired again. Years of training returned instantly. Every movement efficient, every shot deliberate. The attackers quickly realized they weren't fighting a helpless refugee. They were fighting the woman who once commanded the largest military empire in the galaxy. Unfortunately, numbers still mattered, and there were too many enemies. Slowly, relentlessly, the soldiers pushed forward. The queen's ammunition dwindled. The children huddled together, and Ethan could barely remain standing. The situation seemed hopeless. Then every sensor in the area activated simultaneously. Ships. Thousands of ships. The commander's face turned white. No. The sky above New Phoenix Colony suddenly filled with light. Warp signatures appeared everywhere. 1, 10, 100, then thousands. An entire fleet emerged from hyperspace. Not an army, an armada. The largest military force the colony had ever seen. Golden warships stretched across the heavens. Their insignias glowed like stars, the symbol of the celestial dominion. The loyalists had arrived. The commander's voice trembled. Impossible. Impossible. The emergency signal had reached its destination, and every surviving loyal commander had answered, because their queen was alive. Within minutes, Dominion forces overwhelmed the attackers. Enemy ships surrendered. Ground troops dropped their weapons. The Coups' advance force collapsed completely. The battle was over. But the real story was only beginning, because news of what happened spread faster than anyone expected, across thousands of star systems, across dozens of civilizations, across the entire galaxy. Everyone heard the same unbelievable story. The last royal heirs of the Dominion had survived because of a human maintenance worker, not a soldier, not an admiral, not a politician. A man who simply noticed hungry children and decided to help. And that story would change the galaxy forever. The battle for New Phoenix Colony ended before sunrise. By morning, the entire district had transformed into something Ethan barely recognized. Military transports filled the streets. Medical teams rushed between temporary command centers. Dominion soldiers established security perimeters around the abandoned house. And above everything, thousands of golden warships remained suspended in orbit. The colony had become the center of galactic attention overnight. Ethan hated it. He was sitting inside a medical tent while a doctor rapped his shoulder for the third time. "You should be dead. People keep telling me that." The doctor shook his head. "That explosion alone should have killed you." Ethan smiled weakly. Apparently the universe disagreed. The doctor left. A moment later, someone else entered. Queen Serafina. For several seconds, neither spoke. The atmosphere felt strangely awkward. The woman who once ruled 6,000 star systems suddenly seemed unsure how to begin a conversation. Finally, she sat across from him. "My children are asking for you." Ethan laughed. "That's usually not how royalty starts conversations." Useless. For the first time, the queen smiled. A genuine smile. Not a political one, not a royal one. A mother's smile. "They haven't stopped talking about you. That's concerning. They consider you family." The joke vanished from Ethan's face. Family. It had been years since anyone used that word around him. The queen noticed. She noticed everything. "You lost people during the frontier wars." Ethan nodded. "My parents. My husband died during the coup." Silence followed. Two people from different worlds, different species, different lives, connected by loss. Eventually, Serafina spoke again. "There is something I owe you. You don't owe me anything." Incorrect. Her tone immediately became royal, formal, authoritative. "You protected my children when nobody else would." Ethan shrugged. Any decent person would have done the same. The queen slowly shook her head. No, the answer came quietly, but firmly. Most people would have walked away. Neither argued further, because both knew the truth. Helping had been easy. Continuing to help after discovering who they were had not. Fighting armed soldiers certainly wasn't. Yet Ethan had done all three. That mattered more than he realized. Over the next several days, Dominion commanders arrived from every corner of known space. Governors, admirals, diplomats, military leaders, the surviving pillars of a fallen empire. One after another, they met with Queen Seraphina. One after another, they pledged loyalty. And one after another, they asked the same question. Where is the human? At first, Ethan assumed they wanted witness statements, military reports, strategic information. He was wrong, very wrong. The first admiral he met immediately stood and saluted. Ethan nearly dropped his coffee. The second bowed. The third requested permission to shake his hand. The fourth brought gifts. The fifth brought more gifts. By the end of the week, Ethan owned enough expensive items to purchase half the colony. Please make them stop, he begged Seraphina. The queen looked amused. They are grateful. They brought me a starship. They are very grateful. The ship was real, a fully equipped interstellar vessel, given as a thank you gift. Ethan still couldn't believe it. The story continued spreading. Every news network covered it. Every major civilization discussed it. The details varied depending on who told the story. Some claimed Ethan fought hundreds of soldiers alone. Others claimed he personally defeated an army. One report somehow described him wrestling a combat walker. That one wasn't even close to true. But facts no longer mattered. The story had become something larger, a symbol. Across the galaxy, people repeated the same lesson. The future of an empire had been saved not by power, not by wealth, not by fleets, but by kindness. One simple act, a lunch shared with hungry children. Months later, Queen Seraphina officially reclaimed the Dominion capital. The ceremony became the most watched event in modern galactic history. Representatives from thousands of worlds attended. Entire fleets lined the orbital approach. Billions watched live broadcasts. And standing beside the restored queen was Ethan Carter. He absolutely hated being there. I don't belong here. Seraphina adjusted her ceremonial cloak. You do. I'm a maintenance worker. You are also the reason my children are alive. Thousands of cameras focused on them. Ethan wanted to disappear. The queen ignored his discomfort. The ceremony began. Ancient traditions returned. Oaths were sworn. Banners unfurled. The Dominion officially rose again. Then came the final moment, the moment nobody expected. Queen Seraphina stepped forward. The massive hall fell silent. Her voice echoed throughout the chamber. History often celebrates rulers. The audience listened carefully. History celebrates warriors. The queen turned toward Ethan. History celebrates great leaders. Billions watched. But sometimes the fate of civilizations depends upon ordinary people making extraordinary choices. The hall became completely silent. Seraphina raised one hand. Ethan Carter stepped forward when everyone else walked away. The audience rose to their feet. He asked for nothing. More people stood. He expected men's nothing. Soon the entire hall was standing. He simply saw children who needed help. The applause began slowly, then grew louder, and louder, and louder, until it sounded like thunder. Ethan stood frozen, embarrassed, confused, overwhelmed, because he still didn't see himself as a hero. He never would. In his mind, he had simply done what was right, nothing more, nothing less. Yet that was exactly why the galaxy admired him. Power helping power wasn't remarkable. A king helping a king wasn't remarkable. A wealthy person helping another wealthy person wasn't remarkable. But an ordinary human choosing compassion when there was no reward? That was different. That mattered. That inspired people. Years later, children across the restored Dominion would learn about Ethan Carter in school. Statues would be built, books would be written, stories would be told, and every version ended the same way. Not with a battle, not with a fleet, not with a queen, but with a simple lunch, because the greatest moments in history often begin with the smallest decisions. 10 years later, Ethan Carter still lived on New Phoenix Colony. That fact alone confused half the galaxy. By then, he could have lived almost anywhere. The restored dominion had offered him estates on royal worlds. Military leaders had offered honorary ranks. Corporations had offered fortunes. Universities had offered prestigious positions. Ethan declined all of them. He still worked with machines, still fixed broken systems, still preferred practical problems over political ones. To him, fame was exhausting. But there was one thing he could never escape: the children. Or rather, the fact that they weren't children anymore. Lyra had grown into a remarkable young woman, intelligent, confident, patient. She possessed her mother's leadership and her own quiet strength. Jalen became fascinated with exploration and science, helping chart regions of space that had never been mapped. Kiro somehow grew into the tallest member of the family and never stopped talking. Some things never changed. Every year they visited Ethan. Every year they shared a meal together, and every year they reminded him that they considered him family. One evening, during the 10th anniversary of the battle, they gathered on a balcony overlooking the colony. Golden lights stretched across the city. Ships moved between stars overhead. The colony had changed dramatically. Trade flourished. New districts had been built. Entire industries existed because of the renewed alliance between humanity and the Dominion. What began as one act of kindness had ultimately reshaped relations between civilizations, not through treaties, not through military power, but through trust. Lyra stood beside Ethan. "You know they're naming another academy after you." Ethan groaned. "Why do they keep doing that?" "Because you're famous. I'm not." Lyra laughed. "You really have no idea, do you?" "No idea about what?" She pointed toward the city below. Children played in a nearby park. Humans, aliens, dozens of species together. No fear, no hostility, just ordinary life. "When people hear your story," Lyra said softly, "they don't think about the battle." "I certainly hope not. It was a mess." "They don't think about fleets either." Ethan looked at her. "What do they think about?" "The lunch," he blinked. "The lunch," Lyra nodded. "Because everyone understands that part." The stars reflected in her violet eyes. "Most people will never command armies." True. "Most people will never rule worlds." Also true. "But everyone gets chances to help someone." Ethan remained silent. Lyra smiled. "That's why they remember." Far above them, Dominion warships crossed the night sky, not as conquerors, not as symbols of fear, but as protectors. The galaxy still had problems. It always would. There were still conflicts, still dangers, still challenges, waiting beyond explored space. But there was also hope, and hope often starts in unexpected places. A forgotten neighborhood, an abandoned house, 3 hungry children, a tired maintenance worker carrying lunch. None of it looked important at the time. History rarely does. The most significant moments usually arrive disguised as ordinary decisions. A choice to stop, a choice to notice, a choice to care. Ethan never set out to save a royal family. He never wanted recognition. He never imagined his actions would influence millions of lives. He simply saw people who needed help, and he helped. That was the entire secret. No special powers, no grand destiny, no prophecy. Just a decision. The kind of decision anyone can make. That was the lesson Queen Seraphina taught throughout the Dominion. That was the lesson Lyra carried into leadership. And that was the lesson history remembered. Not that a human saved an empire, but that kindness saved an empire. Because in a galaxy filled with advanced technology, massive fleets, and unimaginable power, the most valuable thing remained exactly what it had always been: compassion. The willingness to care about someone else's struggle. The courage to help when there is nothing to gain. The choice to stand beside people when everyone else walks away. Those things changed lives. Sometimes they changed worlds, and once they saved a kingdom hidden among the stars. If you enjoyed this story about how one ordinary human changed the fate of an entire civilization through a simple act of kindness, you'll love the next adventure. Check out the next HFY story, where a human mechanic buys a broken alien robot for scrap, only to discover it contains a secret that powerful governments would kill to possess. Until next time, remember, the smallest actions often create the biggest legends.